All right. Good morning, everybody. Selamat pagi. Welcome and thank you for joining us in this important session, Food for Population Level Management of Elephants in Malaysia. My name is Natasha and I am a Sabahan Australian ecologist. I'll ease us into the topic today, of which this introduction will be followed by Dr. Dzulhelmi, Dr. Mark, Mr. Alex, and Dr. Zainal. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end. So we're here today to examine one of Malaysia's most pressing and persistent conservation challenges. The conservation of the management of elephants, wild elephants, in the context of expanding human development, agriculture, and landscape change. So human-wildlife conflict, particularly with elephants, has become increasingly common in Peninsular Malaysia and Sabah. Farmers lose crops, villages face risk, and elephants often pay the ultimate price. The conflict is emotionally charged and politically sensitive, and often responses are short-term, moving a herd, building a fence, or responding only when incidents escalate. Today's session invites us to zoom out and look at the problem through a population level lens. But what do we mean by population level management? Rather than focusing on individual elephants or isolated conflict sites, population level management considers the needs and behaviors of entire elephant populations, their home ranges, their food requirements, and how they interact with both natural and human-altered landscapes. At the heart of it is the simple truth. Elephants need to eat every single day. Addressing human-elephant conflict without addressing this fundamental reality is like trying to solve traffic congestion without thinking about where the roads go. So how do we create a landscape where elephants have access to food without coming into direct conflict with humans? And no, the answer is not to cull elephants in Malaysia. Rather, this is where the idea of food management comes into play. An approach rooted in ecology, scaled for impact, and grounded in real-world experience. Today, you'll be hearing from a panel of experts who bring deep field knowledge, scientific insight, and innovative practice. We'll have Dr. Dzulhelmi, who is the lead researcher at FGV Holdings. He'll provide insight from the plantation sector's perspective, where solutions must balance ecological and economic sustainability. Then from Dr. Mark, who is the country director at WCS Malaysia, who will contextualize this issue within a broader wildlife management strategy that's already being used in Malaysia. Then Mr. Alex, the founder and chairman of Respect, who will speak of their insights managing and planting a food pasture for elephants in the Kinabatangan area. And Dr. Zainal, who is the program director at BORA, who will share first-hand lessons from a managed elephant food pasture in Tabin, Sabah. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Dzulhelmi to the floor.
Thank you, moderator, our respected panelists, and to my fellow participants today. So as you can see, we are dealing with the food for population level management of elephants in Malaysia. What I want to highlight today is on the national overview and from the oil palm perspective. So as you all know that in Malaysia alone, we have roughly around 30 million hectare of land area. 45% of them are covered by forests, 30% are covered by agriculture, 15% by human settlement and also infrastructure. We also have 10% of abandoned land, and the remainings are for other purposes. And then we also have some policies, framework, and other action plan at the national level. The first one, we are dealing with biodiversity losses, climate change, and today what we are discussing is on the elephant issue. So just imagine the first party will come to us and talks about the biodiversity losses through the National Policy on Biological Diversity, which aims to preserve the biodiversity as the natural heritage. And then the second party comes to us and talks about the National Climate Change Policy, dealing with the greenhouse gas emission reduction, trying to target 45% reduction by 2030. And then the third party will come to us saying about the National Elephant Conservation Action Plan to manage the population at national level and reduce the human-wildlife conflict. As we all know, for Malaysia alone, we have roughly 36 million human population living in our countries, and it is estimated to project up to 42 million human population by 2050. We will have some challenges in the food security and also in terms of the land resource. That is why I want to highlight today's session on optimization in land resource so that we are able to cater all these three elements into one. As you all know that elephant, they need at least 150 kilograms of food daily, including minerals and also on the water itself. Just imagine we are dealing with 1,800 elephant individuals roaming in Peninsular Malaysia. We need 270 tons of food resource for them or to support them daily. And at the same time, we are dealing with climate change, whereby we need to plant certain tree species to get certain incentive so that we are able to reduce the carbon emission. And last but not least, we are also talking about how we want to preserve the biodiversity itself. If we look at it from all these angles, we can say that if we are able to deal with the elephant itself, we can tackle the other two problems. So if we look at the elephant, what do they actually need? They need the plant species that they originated in the forest. And these plant tree species, which can also be recognized under the carbon credit scheme incentive, recognized by the carbon bodies. If we are able to cater this, we can plant these plant species in the abandoned lands, which we have 10%, or should we say around 2.5% abandoned land from agriculture itself, covering around 100,000 hectares of land. So for my recommendation, if we are able to optimize the land resource by establishing the food source for the elephant and at the same time tackle the climate change by planting the plant species that recognized by the carbon body, we are automatically be able to preserve the biodiversity losses, and this will be aligned with our Malaysian national policy framework and action plans. So I pass back to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Dzulhelmi. And if you have any questions for Dr. Dzulhelmi, please put them in chat and we will answer them at the end of the session. Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Mark, and he's the country director of WCS Malaysia and a leading wildlife ecologist whose work focuses on landscape level conservation strategies for large mammals, including elephants. Dr. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natasha. Hi, very good morning, everyone. I'm Mark from Wildlife Conservation Society of Malaysia. Our HQ is actually in New York, but we are a global conservation organization. And in Malaysia, we are pretty much stationed in a few areas in Sabah, Sarawak, and in Peninsular Malaysia. In Sarawak, we work on orangutans closely with the Sarawak Forestry Corporation in an area called Batangai Lanjak and Timau that borders the Batang Keriung area in Kalimantan. In Sabah, we work very closely with Sabah Parks as well as the Fisheries Department of Sabah in an area called Tambisan and another area called Ligitan. And zooming into Peninsular Malaysia, we have an elephant and tiger project that we've been started since 2007 in 2 states, the south of Pahang and also all the forest areas in Johor. And related to the elephant project in Andaropin, one of the mitigation measures that we actually use, particularly with indigenous communities, is something what we call siren fence. It's basically a fence, a line that is attached to a siren, and if the elephant pushes the fence, then the sirens alerts people, and people have to chase the elephants away. This seems to be working quite well in a small area, but not for large plantations. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of this. These are not all the conflict mitigation measures, but some of the mitigation measures. Of course, people do have trenches, they have electric fences. I just mentioned about siren fences. And there's also been a lot of development in terms of establishing food pastures, whereby elephants get attracted and come and feed in these areas and then move on, thereby reducing the likelihood of conflict. But there's also been translocation of elephants, and adding to the mix is basically compensation schemes and trying to increase tolerance of humans towards conflict of the conflict that's caused by elephants. Now, if you looked closely at some of these mitigation measures, and there's enough literature out there to be able to show how certain mitigation measures, if not planned properly, can go against what we really want to do, which is basically trying to save elephants, but also reduce conflict and increase tolerance. The map over here is just an example of how a solar-powered fence erected by Nepal authorities abruptly cuts off the herd's transboundary movement along this route. But we have many cases, I think enough cases in Sabah and in Peninsular Malaysia to show how even electric fences placed haphazardly or not planned can actually restrict movement and move elephants to other neighboring areas, for example. And so the problem is kind of displaced to another plantation. And that's why it's important to be looked at from a landscape perspective. And if you looked at translocation, for example, this is just from a paper from Torre 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And the elephant icon is where the elephants were released. And then you can see that they have traveled to the areas where it's less darker green. And these less darker green or even not so green areas are agricultural lands or open areas, which is basically where people are. And so, hang on. Sorry, I can't seem to move my slide. Okay. And I mean, so what this basically means is that, elephants are going to be, they're going to be drawn to areas that is close to human proximity, and agricultural areas because there is food. If we looked at all the studies that have done that have looked at translocation, these areas that elephants use are not marginal areas. These are actually prime habitats because of the amount of food availability and nutritional value that it offers elephants, like grasses, orchards, oil palm plantations. When there's chipping of oil palm, elephants get attracted to these areas, right? And so conflict will continue to happen. That is something we need to acknowledge. Conflict will continue to happen as long as there are these spaces between where there's food for elephants, then they get attracted to these areas as well. And so from the previous studies, a lot of these translocations don't really work. And removing one elephant from a herd is not going to solve the problem, as you still have the remaining individuals in the herd. And most of the time, females are in the herd. And you don't want to remove these females because it's going to have a major impact on the population in the area. And you don't even know how it's going to impact the population in the new area that you translocate. So there are, considerations there to be taken into account. This is a nice paper from a bunch of people with the Wildlife Department and also the WCS. They did a dung count survey and they found that they have about 0.05 elephants per square kilometer. but it's been said that the carrying capacity could be 0.1 per square kilometers. And what this means is that there is potential for more elephants to be sustained in the area. But having said that, translocation is still utilized as one of the main mitigation measures in terms of trying to deal with the conflict in Endau Rompin. In fact, this paper actually suggests otherwise. And it's not a one key fits all solution sort of mitigation that we need to look at. There's multiple mitigation measures that need to be taken into account. So I think what's really critical is that you may be able to carry out a mitigation measure at the plantation, and you might reduce conflict, but how that conflict is then displaced to another area or collectively is very often ignored at the landscape level. And so, for example, will food pastures, let's say create a food pasture in an area where there's a lot of conflict, but does that, that's going to attract elephants. Obviously, it's a no-brainer where you have food and elephants will come to the area, to food pastures. But how is it going to move along from the food pasture? Is it going to stay around there? Is it going to go elsewhere? Is it going to go to another plantation and cause issues? It's the same with electric fencing as well. Are the electric fencing going to channel these animals to other nearby plantations? And that's why it's quite critical to be able to understand the ecology of elephants and the movement patterns. So I think this is my last slide, and I just wanted to again stress on the need for science-based assessments, understanding and assessing how movement patterns and overlaying how these mitigation measures are going to be set across a landscape lens is important, because you just don't want to solve the problem at the site level, which is small. You want to solve it at the population level or a landscape level, and I think I was reminded recently that such information actually exists. Unfortunately, it's not being shared or not being utilized optimally to guide decision making, which is kind of sad. But I think hopefully this will be one of the key recommendations, that available information it needs to be pulled together to be able to guide or have informed decision making. The other thing is multiple mitigation measures need to be applied. So if you just do trenches or you don't just do electric fences, it might not work. But if you have a multiple sort of mitigation measures, including food pastures, I think that is something that needs to be tried and needs to be assessed. And again, it's very important to look at it not just at just one small subpopulation or one site, but over a landscape lens. The number one question that always comes to people who own the land or govern the areas is that, well, the population of elephants have just exceeded. They're just growing. So what are we going to do about it? I suppose there are new sort of interventions and new sort of techniques such as immunocontraception, whereby you limit the productive ability of elephants, so they don't actually breed for a certain period of time. You can control that, but I think the key question is: are there any areas in Peninsular Malaysia or in Sabah that we know that has exceeded the carrying capacity? Like for example, Endau Rompin has not, and so do we even need to go to these measures? Maybe at some point we would probably have to, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And finally, my last point is to be able to say that if we talk to different stakeholders, they will all have different opinions and different views and from where they look at the problem. If you talk to the plantation people, if you talk to the indigenous people, local people, you talk to the policymakers, they all have different issues. I mean, from the politicians' perspective, they're trying to reduce the amount of damage and get their constituents to actually vote for them because they're going to solve the problem. But how are you going to solve the problem if you're not going to be able to look at it from pulling together all this information and then planning for it in a proper way? So it's not just, okay, let's just do translocation or let's just do food pastures. It's how do we utilize previous information that's understanding the ecological aspects, but also understanding the social dimensions. I think it's only then we're able to promote coexistence. But not easy thing, easy concept to be explained, but not an easy thing to be done. I think that's all from me, Natasha. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Dr. Mark. And now we have our next two speakers will be discussing real-world examples of elephant food pastures, including the challenges faced and on-ground impact so far. So please invite to the floor Mr. Alexander Yee, the founder and chairman of Respect, a non-governmental organization that is committed to resolving the long-standing issue with human-elephant conflict by planting and maintaining an elephant food pasture in the Kinabatangan area of Sabah. Over to you, Mr. Alex.
Good morning, and thank you, Natasha, for that brief introduction. Thank you for the panelists for joining, the fellow presenters, and also everyone who has tuned in. Let me take this session as a platform of sharing. I am not a scientist by training, but within Respect itself, we have prominent scientists that have worked on this area before that are giving us advice and rendering their services to us. Respect stands for Responsible Elephant Conservation Trust. It is, in fact, a non-profit organization. We invite businesses to support the ongoing elephant conservation work in Sabah. The purpose of this organization is mainly to mitigate the human versus elephant conflicts, and also to work on habitats of the elephant so that both human and elephant can live and coexist in harmony within Sabah. The organization was registered officially on the 9th of February, 2021. It stemmed out of an incident which happened on the 1st of March in 2018. For those in Sabah might remember, there was a baby elephant that went into a primary school in Telopit, which is the middle part of Sabah. It went directly to the canteen looking for food. Now, that prompted a few like-minded individuals to discuss ways how to minimize or solve these challenges. Let me just get... Natasha, I can't find the arrow. There you go. Thank you. Yep. So there it is. The objectives of Respect are to create a large-scale landscape which is appropriate for the elephant. And while we are doing that, we engage the local community. In order for us to embark on such, I would say, lofty project, we thought we get on board some pretty heavy weights down so that it put credibility onto the work itself. So we invited the ex-Chief Justice of Malaysia, Tun Richard Melanjun, to be our patron. I sit in as the chairman of the trust. Within the trust itself is also a moderator today, Dr. John Payne. We have Mr. Fong within the board of the trust. We have Datu Mugutan, as well as another timber personnel, Miss Yap Li Ling, a legal advisor in the form of Mr. Carl Melanjun. Incidentally, Dr. Zainal, who is presenting today, is also in one of our subcommittees, making sure that we are on the right track as far as work is concerned. Now, this is quite a complex map of Sabah. It shows the various forested area which is presented within this state. This green part down here is the center part of Sabah. Within the report of Sabah Wildlife Department 2020, it is reported that there are 3 major trenches or major areas where elephants roam within this state. The center part of Sabah, you have on this part, Tabind, and on this side, Lower Kinabatangan. Now, because of the bridge that has been built, constructed down here, it prevented the elephant from roaming past this side and go over to the center. So there is, in fact, a cut-off point down here for the elephants. Yeah? So there is this part, this Lower Kinabatangan part as well as center part of Sabah. The incident where the baby elephant visited the primary school occurred and happened within the center part of Sabah in Telupit. This is what the area looks like. That circle part is in fact a class 1 protected forest with a size of about 22,000 hectares. And it is not far from Telupit town itself down here where the incident happened. So a team of us came down to Telupit to do a recce of the area. We then zero in on this abundant sawmill site to propose to Sabah Wildlife to Forestry Department to start off a food planting project. This is back in 2019. That was the recce team. We have done not less than 3 recces before we decided on this spot. You will see Dr. John Payne smack in the middle down here. Dr. Zainal, yeah, he's here. We have 2 rangers with us. Yeah. Mr. Fong is here. Now, this is an interesting tree. For those who have been studying the behavior of the elephant, this shows that presence of the elephant, because this tree, the bark of the trees has been rubbed off, mainly caused by elephant trying to rub their itch off. Yeah. So this, when we saw this, we were rather happy. Yeah. We were not only looking for dunks of the elephant, we were looking for such signs as well. After marking the sites and also signing a memorandum of understanding with the Forestry Department, we don't work on the site. The basic work is to clear off all the bushes, the lalangs or the unwanted grass down there, put a bit of fertilizer, and then start planting. Now, we will remember that recce job was done in 2019. It wasn't until 2020 that the team started to plant grass there. And by then, COVID has already sets in and engulfed the whole place that we are working in, and also around the world. Work was very slow. It was hampering the progress. By 2023, we have invited a soil scientist from Western Australia. He was in fact on the way down to Sabah to look at some other pasture, and I thought from my business associate to link him up and ask him for his advice. He came down to Tawai, took some soil samples, and he in fact advised us that we need to really work on this soil because it being a timber sawmill site, abundant timber sawmill site, the soil is no longer suitable for planting. The decision to proceed was slightly hampered by the fact that the Forestry Department as well as ourselves couldn't quite get to an understanding of how to proceed with the work. While trying to negotiate with Sabah Forestry Department, the team also then considered planting work along the Kinabatangan River. Remember, there are 3 areas within Sabah itself where elephants are around. Lower Kinabatangan area is one of it. I am a tourism operator by training, and this map that you will see down here, that you are looking at down here, is Kampung Bilit in Lower Kinabatangan. Presence of elephants is found down here. This red dot of this map is where Melloch is, and within the bank of this Lower Kinabatangan area where the river flows, you have this yellow spot. This yellow spot is actually this picture on the left-hand side down here. This is the banana garden. Sometime in the early 2000, WWF together with the villagers in Bilit started to plant banana plants on this site. Yeah? They think that they will provide food for the elephants, but then the project was put on hold, and BCT, which stands for Borneo Conservation Trust, proceeded to bought over 3 pieces of land down here to try and create an elephant corridor. Now, this is an important concept that I am trying to share with everybody, because the team in Respect have then decided for us to mitigate or to reduce the human versus elephant conflict, there are two possible ways to go about it. One is to create a food corridor for the elephant. That means linking two forested area with a corridor and moving the elephant across along this corridor. Another concept is actually to just create a food pasture. When we talk about elephant habitat or wildlife habitat being destroyed, more or less we are referring to availability of food within the area that the wildlife is found in. So this is the red dot spot, the lodge that I'm operating. While waiting for permission from the various government agency to create a food corridor, we started collaborating with Intrepid Foundation, which is a one of the largest, or if not the largest adventure travel company in the world, with a sales projected to be $1 billion by 2027. And we worked with them and set aside an acre of a 5-acre land that we owned. We cleared it and we started to plant various species of grass. We took from Tabin, where Dr. John and Dr. Zainal has started to plant napier there. We took some grass cuttings from Tabin. We took some from Batu Putih, which in the form of barau or propok, and we started to plant on this site. That turned out to be rather successful because right after the launching, Natasha, there you go. Right after the launching on the 4th of May 2024, we have a herd of elephant consisting of 6 adults and 1 baby coming over. That pasture is still continuing being maintained, and we constantly have elephant coming. You will see at the bottom of this picture, we are combining both food for the elephant as well as electric fence down there, ensuring the elephant does not cross over to the human habitat area in the form of my lodge. This is work being carried on. You will recall that slides, it shows that this piece of lands are all along the Kinabatangan River. We decided then when the Tourism Ministry to approach us to apply from Department of Irrigation and Drainage to work on the Leperan Reserve. Now, in Sabah and other parts of Malaysia in particular, we are aware that depending on the width of the river, a certain portion of the land beside the river is being set aside as reserve land. Whoever occupied those lands will not be able to construct permanent structure on this Leperan Reserve. So we applied from Department of Irrigation and Drainage. We proceeded to plant along the river, along the Leperan Reserve, which then is along the river. It produces not only food for the elephant, it has in existent water source for the elephant, and we add on mineral blocks for the elephant. Yeah, that has worked out rather well. Reason being of us saying that is since started planting on the 20th of January when we launched it with the Minister of Tourism, Culture and the Environment, we have 4 visiting herds that have come by, 1 in March, 1 in April, 1 in July, and in September. So I think the parting words to those who have tuned in down here who are interested in setting up food corridor or food pastures for mitigation measures of elephant and human is to give some thoughts to these 2 aspects, to either setting up a food corridor or food pastures. There are 2 slightly varied approach, but at the end of the day, it is towards producing food for the elephant. We are hoping that they will then spend more time on this area, then venturing into the plantation, into human habitats, into the kampong areas, and create those challenges that we are having right now. Thank you. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you, Mr. Alex, for the insight into respects activities in the Kinabatangan area. And just from Mr. Alex's recommendations, we can see that large-scale food corridors and food pastures for elephants should be part of the national guidance to manage Bornean elephant populations. So now we move on to Dr. Zainal, whose work with BORA in Sabah offers a powerful model for what's possible when we think beyond fences, translocation, and short-term fixes. Dr. Zainal, the floor is yours.
Can get the slides on, please. Right. Assalamualaikum. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Natasha and fellow panelists. Today, I'll share with you why managing elephant conflict really means managing elephant food. Elephants need space, socializing, and food every day, just like you and I. We go, of course, humans go beyond our limits. And without addressing these necessities for the elephants, all the measures remain short-term. Next, please. So I created this shifting baseline to try and emphasize the issue of food demand by elephants. In 1970s, elephant numbers were lower, but food in the forests were more abundant. No issues or very little issues or conflict. By 2025, populations have grown, yet food quality and availability for the elephants have shrunken. Each adult elephant needs about 100 to 200 kilograms of food daily. And by 2050, the gap between food supply and demand will widen further. We cannot treat this imbalance as normal. Next, please. So these photos show elephants raiding crops and even damaging houses. Sometimes human lives are lost. This creates so much tension, especially for farmers and smallholders. For people, it's survival and livelihood. But for the elephants, it's food to live. Conflict is a clash between humans and elephants. So this is really a story of haves and have-nots. Humans have cultivated food and built security for themselves. But for elephants, there's nothing of that. They depend on what the forest provides. As food inside the forest shrink, they become the have-nots, forced to cross into human spaces, not out of aggression, but out of hunger. Next, please. And many elephants die from retribution killings that includes poisoning or being shot at. Being around humans, again, they are so much exposed to snares. Poison, as you can see, causes slow and painful death, and sometimes killing the mother and her unborn calf. So snares often leave a lot of suffering for years, fracturing the bones, and these elephants will have to limp all the way to catch up with the remaining of the herds. And I've seen all of this. They end up emaciated and eventually dies. Occasionally, the wounds get infected and they die again of septicemia. These are not natural losses, but the result of conflict, reminding us we need safer, and a more lasting solutions. Next, please. So current responses, as mentioned by the other panelists, includes installing electric fences with or without trenches, translocation, using patrol teams to move elephants out, and scaring them with loud noises, and even resorting to burning tires, using chili powders, beehives, and all those. But most are temporary fixes. Electric fences often become non-functional when wrongly installed or constructed, or when they're not well maintained. Translocation just shifts the problem herd or individual from one place to the other, and scaring doesn't last long. They're smart and fast learners. These are just reactive responses and not sustainable means to solve the conflict. Next, please. So can we manage wild elephants without managing their food? The answer is no. This slide shows how elephants actually use the landscape. Satellite-collared elephants reveal that herds spend most of their time on the fringes of this 120,000 hectares reserve, rather than inside. They are drawn to the boundaries where food is more accessible, and this is also where conflict with people often occurs. The diagram in the middle shows their daily activity budget. Most of an elephant's time is spent on feeding, eating, followed by moving, resting, and social interactions. Their life revolves around meeting their enormous demand for food. So when we talk about elephant ecology, we must always begin with food, because it drives their movement, their behavior, and ultimately their survival. Next, please. So elephants are social herds, moving long distances and eating grasses, leaves, fruits, and crops when natural food is scarce. Each adult, again, will consume about 100 to 200 kilograms a day, and their home ranges, as you can see, is covering hundreds of square kilometers. So meeting these basic needs is central to reducing conflict. Next, please. Historically, the annual death, in Sabah is average 13. But since 2021, this has surged to 30 deaths, over 30 deaths a year. Causes, if you look by frequency, includes poisoning, septicemia, shooting, an example of retribution killing, poaching, and even crocodile attacks. The image I took on the bottom right shows a magnificent tusker poisoned during replanting of oil palm. It suffered really excruciating pain, as you can see from the stance and the facial expression, before succumbing to death a few days later. So rising mortality reflects conflict pressures more than natural causes. Slide, please. So in Sabah, we converted wasteland, which are degraded open areas with ferns and non-edible trees and climbers, into productive elephant pastures. We chose species that are site suitable. Some grasses are more prone to flooding than others, or drought. We chose also based on nutrition, because yield is important for carrying capacity and looking at the numbers. So Napier is high yield, and so is Barao. So practicality, it's more associated with easy maintenance of the species and diversity, more than one species to suit different age groups. The result, large forage areas that reduce crop raiding and support elephant survival. Next, please. So you can see from the slide, elephant herds feeding on Barao, feeding on Napier in our pastures. And we also see the calves learning to graze, guided by the parents. Now, this is crucial to affect the change in feeding behavior from oil palm to grass, starting from an early age. So the daily routine of the elephants in using the pastures are predictable, entering the pastures in the evening when it's cooler and safe, and leaving back to the forest by dawn or before dawn, before it gets warmer and before human traffic gets busier. So pastures not only provide food, it also shape the long-term feeding behavior. Next, please. So the pastures that we provided are more than just food. They bathe, they swim, they play and cool down in nearby rivers or man-made water bodies before entering the pastures. And the mineral blocks we also put for them provide treats for the young and the old, as well as supplements to the diet. The dug out mud wallow that we provided inside the pastures provide them with excellent social spaces, both for the mother and babies. So it's a family package of food, of fun, and bonding that supports both ecology and welfare. So a family package that we hope would last generations after generations. Next, please. So the bar chart on the left shows the annualized conflicts and death of elephants in some parts of some states of Malaysia. The right shows meals provided to the elephants, increasing from under 100 in 2021 when we first started the pasture, and rising significantly after the second pasture was created in 2023 to about 1,600 meals in 2025. So a meal is defined as the number of elephants coming into the pasture multiplied by the number of days they spend on the pasture. So it's clear evidence that elephant pastures work, and replicating them will bring even more herds to a safe food source. So when we grow pastures, elephants come, elephants feed, elephants remember. That's important. Elephants remember, and they will thrive. Next, please. So managing elephant conflict means managing elephant food at scale and long-term basis. Policymakers and stakeholders speak of coexistence, but farmers on the ground live the daily reality of conflicts. They face losses in livelihood and sometimes lives. So amplifying their frustrations and anger. So with more elephants but shrinking food source, we cannot manage elephants without managing their food. If we want true coexistence, we must first bridge this gap. Only then can elephants, forests, and people share a future together. Next, please. Three actions are key. Firstly, we must move from ad hoc efforts to a population level management across the country. Of course, supported by proper monitoring and conflict mitigation. Secondly, establish and maintain pastures as core conservation infrastructures integrated with functional fencing and trenches, and supported by plantations and other stakeholders. And lastly, strengthen the collaboration between policymakers, communities, as well as stakeholders. Work together to align policies with realities on the ground. So with these steps, we shift from conflict towards managing elephants for long-term conservation. Effective population management must focus on restoring and managing food resources, not only on fences, translocation, and anti-poaching. So true coexistence begins with food. If we secure food for the elephants, we reduce conflict, protect farmers, and secure the future of both elephants and forests. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zainal, for your insightful talk and explaining the success and impact of the pasture in Tabin. So Dr. Zainal's key takeaway is that the elephant population must focus on restoring and managing their food resources. So now we will move on to the questions. And we have a couple questions in the chat. So I'll go to the first one. And this is a 3-part answer. So I'll start with the first question that sets it up. Does Malaysia currently provide any form of compensation or relief scheme for farmers and local communities when their crops or property are damaged by wildlife? There's an example here that in some countries, the measures have reduced retaliatory killings, even if they're not the most sustainable long-term solution. Would anyone like to answer that one?
Can I just start off and then maybe if Dr. Zainal or anybody else? So there are compensation schemes. In fact, the government allocated a huge amount of money in the previous budget, and in Semenanjung, Malaysia, in Peninsular Malaysia, if you have a complaint, you can actually file in a form with the Department of Wildlife National Parks, and they will actually send someone to be able to go and investigate and assess what kind of crop damage there is. So there is something in Peninsular Malaysia. I'm not quite sure. Maybe Dr. Zainal can or anybody else in the panel can chime in on Sabah. But I think compensation schemes are critically needed because it is one of those measures that's going to actually reduce a sense of retaliatory killing towards elephants. Some may say that you don't need to do that, but actually it's a critical element and success for a lot of the mitigation measures that has been applied in all other countries as well. So the faster you give the compensation, it's supposed to ease the burden, but when there's a loss of a life, it becomes very complicated, and compensation itself is not going to be deemed as satisfactory enough, so there are various behavioral aspects to look at when you're looking at working with communities in terms of increasing tolerance. But I'll pause there and pass it over to the panel.
Compensation is excellent, and with Politan, we started compensation way before I joined in, which is in the 70s, and it doesn't work 100% because some farmers, they would allow elephants to come in and eat their oil palm and claim for compensation. So these are things that will cause failures in what the government wants to do. So now, if it's still being provided now, then it's excellent. But again, like Dr. Mark mentioned, it has to be investigated thoroughly. Similar with cases of predation by tigers on buffaloes, there are many criteria. The buffalo must be owned, there must be a tag on the buffalo must be in an enclosure. If it's attacked, then you get compensation. So under many different contexts, especially in Malaysia, it can be improved, certainly.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Zainal and Dr. Mark. And that question was from Carolyn. And your answer pretty much summed up what she had asked next, which is, if yes, can you share examples of Malaysia's success, which I think is, there's not a lot of success. That might be the other mitigation strategies should be more focused. And she also mentioned, if not, do you think the mechanisms could be realistically considered by the stakeholders? And you had answered that and had said it can be difficult for Malaysia's sake in terms of oil palm plantations. So we'll move on to Shamil's question, and his question is about, to what extent can mitigation strategies developed for human-elephant conflict be adapted to address emerging cases of human-turtle conflict? So setting the scene, in Semporna, Sabah, there is growing concern regarding green turtles encroaching into seaweed farms and grazing on cultivated seaweed, raising questions about the transferability of conflict management frameworks across terrestrial and marine systems. So what would your recommendations be for a marine ecosystem?
Again, maybe I could start off first. I think, regardless of the system, and I think the critical aspect is to be able to understand the ecology of the particular species we're talking about and the context we are looking at in terms of the environment. I mean, if you looked at elephants in this webinar, Dr. Zainal very aptly put it in a sense where if you don't look at the food availability and the food pastures, then you're going to be looking at all the short-term sort of measures lah. But I think short-term measures and the long-term measures need to be looked in together, right? And so I think the same would apply with any sort of system and any sort of species. You'd have to look at the ecological aspects and the social dimensions as well. And it's not something that can be easily just applied across the systems lah. And it's even within the species itself. If you looked at the Kinabatangan landscape, and if you compare that to the landscape in Endau Rompin, for example, Endau Rompin is extremely fragmented. It's like an island in that sense. And mitigation measures that might work here might not even work in Kinabatangan, for example, or vice versa. It's very, very landscape specific to a certain extent lah. So all I'm saying is it needs to be looked at from an ecological and also social dimension and environmental aspect lah. So I'll just sum it up as that and pass it over to the panel.
Would anyone else like to add in?
No, I totally agree what Dr. Mark have said. There is not one brush that can paint and solve the whole thing here. I would suggest the person who is working on the sea turtle landscape to study the landscape down there and see how the behavior of the sea turtle can be more or less monitored and even controlled so that you don't get that kind of human and turtle conflict that you mentioned. That's why in the presentation, we realized that a food corridor will not be a solution for most of the challenges that we face. We even say, look, talk about food pasture. There is absolutely not a solution that fits all. Yeah, agreed.
Okay, thank you so much. We do have some more questions. However, we are running out of time, so I'll quickly recap our policy recommendations. And if there is more time at the end, then we can answer the remaining questions. So thank you all so much for being part of this important conversation on food for population management of elephants in Malaysia. This morning, we've gone through case-by-case conflict mitigation and reactive solutions. And we've heard that to manage elephants sustainably and to reduce conflict meaningfully, we must look at the landscape, the ecology, and the economics. And we must do so at a population level. So what does real long-term systemic management look like for elephants? From today's discussion, we've heard some lots of clear and actionable policy recommendations, but I'll summarize with these. So first, we must manage elephants with food. So taking the abandoned or underutilized land as an opportunity, not a liability. And by converting these areas into food pastures, planted with a variety of species and supplemented with mineral blocks, we can proactively redirect elephants away from high conflict areas. Then to incentivize, today's speakers make it really, really clear, conservation must also make economic sense. Then establishing food pastures and establishing high conservation value buffer zones that is required for all agricultural or industrial activities. We not only offer elephant food sources, but also create vital food corridors that support the broader biodiversity and long-term ecosystem resilience. This needs to be balanced between all organisms, because I'm sure it's not just elephants in the environment that needs these areas. So just balancing the needs of one species and others. And to maintain and monitor the current and future food, pastures, and corridors, developing a national framework that integrates these food-based strategies alongside other mitigation measures that are already in place. And they should really be orchestrated at a national level to be able to manage elephants at a population level. So these will require coordination across conservationists, government agencies, estate managers, local communities, but they offer a roadmap for lasting coexistence. As we close this session, I encourage all of us, from policymakers to researchers to private managers, to take these recommendations seriously, reach out to necessary stakeholders and ask questions. If elephants are to thrive in Malaysia, it will not be solely through fences or force. It will be through designing landscapes where their needs and ours can be met together. So thank you for being in the session. Let's carry this momentum forward into our next steps, partnerships and policies. So that concludes our session for today. If you need to go, that's totally fine. But if we have a few more moments to answer some questions, would that be okay, Jietian?
Yep, we can do it until 10:15 maybe.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have some other questions here. So we have a question from Shu Chi. The 2018 proposal to hold plantation owners accountable for wildlife deaths remain unimplemented, raising concerns about enforcement and accountability. In your opinion, what strategies or policies could be most effective in making sure wildlife protection is a priority and that these measures are actually put into practice to help manage human-elephant conflicts sustainably?
Is it okay for me to answer?
Yes.
The Perhilitan or the Department of Wildlife and National Park, they have raised that for any death penalty convicted, the raise of the penalty was increased up to 1 million ringgit for Peninsular Malaysia. So I hope that answers this question. And number two, we as the oil palm industry, we must safeguard our oil palm plantation and try to avoid from other large animals to enter, such as tigers, the sun bear, or also on the elephant itself. So from there is no such thing as trying to poison them, to kill them, just to avoid our plantation from being damaged. So these are the most sustainably approach to ensure that both sides do not encounter or conflict between human and wildlife itself.
Thank you, Dr. Dzulhelmi. Does anyone have
Yeah,
any...
can I add? Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
thank you.
Dr. Zul. The other issue that we face, I mean, if you're looking at poisoning, sometimes the poisoning does not occur within that plantation. It occurs, you say, in a smallholders plantation, but poison doesn't kill them immediately. They don't just drop dead. They'll be traveling for kilometers and sometimes end up in a bigger plantation, but it's not the fault of the plantation. It is done somewhere else. So that's number one. Number two, I think so far it is so difficult to get, because when you to do claim or you want to bring to court, the first thing that you need to know is what poison killed the elephant. And it's not easy. If you send it to the chemistry department, they want you to give them several lists of poison so that they can test it. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of poison. And it is easier said to accuse a person of doing it, but to prove it, first it cannot be just this is suggestive of poisoning. It has to be what poison killed them, and to isolate some of these herbicides or weedicides, it is not an easy process. things like phosphates, or it turns to phosphines, and it disappears when you open up the carcass. So many things that you have to look at, and it has to be set upon like you're doing a forensic study of what caused it. It has to be done to look at the history. Where was the elephants coming from? How far? Which plantations? And what are the available poisons in the country? What are the available herbicides or weedicides that can kill elephant? So these things it's not easy to try and sort of establish who or who's responsible. But I think it is still not too late. I mean, the Malaysia has got the National Poison Center. They've got so many, maybe chemistry department that can analyze poison. So this, but again, it has to be work in collaboration. And then what samples do you take? All these are important for you to diagnose a poison. So it can, again, it can be done if the policy states that it should be in that form.
Thank you, Dr. Zainal. Thank you, Dr. Dzulhelmi. We'll move on to the next question, which is about the food pastures. So the question from Melissa is, how much reduction in human elephant conflict cases after the food pastures have been established? And also, what are the feedback from the communities that live in that area?
I'll answer first, and maybe Alex, carry on.
No, okay. Thank you, Dr. Zainal. I thought I can just take that. We have a recent example in July. There are two villages in July where we had cases of herds of elephant visiting. We are over at Kampung Bilit that we started to plant the pasture and then the food corridor. Further down, about 7 miles downstream, you have another village called Kampung Sukau. Now, in that very month itself, when the herd of elephant came by, in Kampung Bilit, there was no conflict incidents. As in, they didn't go to the village area, they didn't destroy any of the crop, they didn't go into the houses, and they didn't cause any damage. But then further down in Kampung Sukau, about 2 days later, I've got Sabah Wildlife Department sending me images, elephant entering Kampung Sukau, enter into one or two of the houses, kick some of the electrical appliances such as washing machine and all. So we don't have direct statistics or figures to show this, but thus far it is proven that Kampung Bilit has got a reduction of human versus elephant conflict, whereas the other villages outside of Kampung Bilit, you tend to get those reports coming through. So I'm not sure whether that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, for in Tabin is a clear-cut example that I gave just now in terms of meals that we provide to the elephants, and how by increasing the number of pastures, by replicating what we did, you could have them spending more time. To us at BORA, what we think is that 1 day in our pasture is 1 day out of conflict. And to measure it more scientifically, we use the number of meals that we feed to the elephants. And you can see that it is increasing by increasing pastures. So what we need to do, there's so many areas, and I think Mark did mention an important point, to look into trails, to look into their movements and all that, and not simply to establish pastures where and when you want. It has to be along the path, and it is not a short, it needs a long-term strategy to see the impact. And from what we are seeing, I mean, I'm happy that we see the increase. By increasing pastures, you increase their presence. You increase the amount of meals that you feed. But again, these are free-ranging elephants. They have choices. But if you can encourage them to spend longer time, then you're already solving part of the problem. I mean, for you to analyze as to how much damage it has reduced over so many years, it takes time. It can be done, but it takes time. So in the meantime, the policy has to change so that whatever land under forestry or buffer, if there are elephant going through those, we can enrich those. I think that's my part.
Thank you, Mr. Alex and Dr. Zainal. a follow-up question from that, and I think it's an important one, is does having more food pastures increase the number of elephants? And what should we do about that?
Yes, there's a very common question that, I mean, it's solving a problem. Dr. Mark did mention using of contraception, which is PZP, porcine zona pellucida. It's done in Africa, in so many reserves, they're doing it and they're happy with it. That's one way. Another way is you have to look at the logical, of course, when you increase food source, you increase the numbers. That is a no-brainer. But then you got to decide, what do you want actually? Do you want the elephant numbers to go down? Then, I mean, crudely speaking, shoot them. In the past, that's what's happened. In the 70s, in the 80s, people are still resorting to, if there's a problem elephant, kill them. There's a lot more. The same strategy occurs in Africa. But now, because of human looking at the ethical point, looking at the important emotional points by others, they resort to contraception. It works. But can we do it here? Of course, if the policy says we contracept, then I'm willing to do it, and I'm sure there are others who's willing to do it. But it's back to what you want really. Do you want, like, same thing with macaques? Do you want more of them, or do you want to cut down the numbers? Same thing with elephants. Of course, when you increase food, you increase the numbers. But actually, what does the country want? We should put that as a criteria and ask people, what do they want with elephants? Do they want to reduce the population? Yes, it can be done.
Thank you for the insight, Dr. Zainal. And we have a question here from Oi Ching, and it's about establishing food pasture for elephants living within forest reserves. What is your opinion on that? And is it feasible to reduce the conflict between indigenous community and elephants? For example, the Belum Temanggur Forest Complex in Hulu Perak, where many indigenous villages are located within the forest complex. So what examples can we draw from that one?
Mark?
Maybe I'll try to answer that. So I think in the context of Belum and Temanggur, particularly Temanggur, because it's a forest reserve and subjected to logging. And if you go into these areas, a lot of these areas have what they call matau, or areas where they used to keep the logs lying. It's all open areas. And some of these areas can actually be developed into food pastures. But there has to be consensus from the forestry department or people that actually own the land to be able to say, yes, we're going to be able to create these food pastures, whether it's grasses or other sorts of different vegetation, but that may not necessarily be something under the sort of policy that they have. But this is a conversation that needs to take place, I suppose. But if you look at Belum, for example, it's a more or less primary forest. Yes, of course, there were people living in there in the past, and those there's some patches where they have fruit orchards. There was also a small rice field, and so there was a lot of heterogeneity going on in terms of the forest itself, and that enabled elephants and other animals, even other ungulates, to be able to thrive in that area. And if you looked along the riparian areas, that's where most of the animals actually congregate, because there's more grasses in these areas as well, right? So I think if you're trying to look in terms of trying to reduce conflict for people that live inside some of these safe spaces of this prime forest, then you would have to actually look into how you're going to manage the policy aspect of it and enable the governing authorities need to be able to see if this is something that they are comfortable with, to enable food pastures, to see and test whether that's going to actually reduce conflict with the local people. Again, like what Dr. Zainal said, it's a long process. It's not an immediate thing. And to document and monitor this, unfortunately, you need to be able to take that journey and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to monitor them, and then you'll be able to show that, But there's already some examples out there already, and so we can draw from those examples and use best practices to be able to start implementing some of this. So that's my response for the context of Belum Temenggong Forest Complex.
Perfect. Thank you for your insight, Dr. Mark. We will have to wrap up as it is 10:15. We have a lot of other questions as well, but thank you for the panelists who have been answering them so far. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the panelists here. You will be able to find them online. And we have a comment here, and it was congratulations to all the panelists for your continuing concerted effort to balance between development and the environment. So I think we'll end on that. And thank you so much to everyone else who has also attended this meeting. And thank you to Jietian for
Get well soon, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tel.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Okay.
much, everybody.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day now.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.